We live in a segregated culture, and I don't mean segregated racially, though the left is certainly working on that. I mean that it's segregated generationally. The younger generations have their own culture, their own language, their own art, their own music, their own universe to themselves, which exists almost entirely online. It shouldn't be like this, and it wasn't always like this, but in the internet age, this cultural bifurcation of young and old is only getting worse. And kids have their own celebrities, too. These are people who gain tens of millions of fans, even hundreds of millions of fans, young fans, and become household names for younger people. So they're household names among the children in the household, but not the adults, while remaining almost entirely anonymous to anyone over the age of, say, 30 or 25. A prime example of this is YouTube star MrBeast. And the YouTuber known as MrBeast, real name Jimmy Donaldson, has 145 million subscribers on the platform. That's just for his primary channel. Donaldson also has several offshoot channels, each boasting millions of additional subscribers. On his main channel, Donaldson has 3 times as many subscribers as Taylor Swift, twice as many as Justin Bieber. In fact, he has more subscribers than every pop star, more than every internet personality, more than every media or entertainment company, aside from Sony's India division. That one hasn't beat, but other than that, he has the most. He is massively successful, wildly famous. And yet I hadn't heard of him until a few months ago. I spend much of my day online for my job, unfortunately. I also have a YouTube channel of my own, which feels suddenly quite obscure by comparison. But I've only just recently become vaguely familiar with MrBeast. And even now, I wouldn't recognize the guy if he passed me on the sidewalk. It is, to say the least, very troubling that someone can become this prominent among younger generations and have this much influence over them, and yet be so obscure to the rest of us. If you're a parent and you've made the mistake of giving your child open access to the internet, you're placing an enormous amount of faith in these influencers who are influencing your kids. It is a faith that is almost always, or really always, misplaced. Because even the most family-friendly content, the most seemingly innocuous, as most of MrBeast's content appears to be, can subtly, or not so subtly, introduce concepts that will take your child down a very dark path. And in the case of MrBeast, that path has been opened by his sidekick and co-star on his videos named Chris Tyson. Tyson's a frequent collaborator with MrBeast and an internet celebrity in his own right with nearly 14 million subscribers across TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. And he appears in many of MrBeast's videos. It's very familiar to fans of the channel. And those fans, most of them kids again, have been watching over the last few months as Tyson has transformed himself from a married man with a child to something that is supposed to look like some sort of approximation of a woman. Fans had noticed for several weeks as Tyson underwent a sort of bizarre physical change, not only growing his hair out, but beginning to appear increasingly frail and sickly and started wearing women's clothes and all the rest of it. Finally, last week, Tyson came out as trans and confirmed that he's been on hormone replacement therapy for the past 2 months. Explaining his decision, Tyson tweeted, quote, "Informed consent HRT saved my and many others' lives. The hurdles GNC, gender nonconforming people, have to jump through to get life-saving gender-affirming healthcare in a first-world country is wild to me. Just let people make informed decisions about their own bodies." In response to the concerns some people have raised about the effect his transition, quote-unquote, might have on his young son, Tucker, Tyson said, quote, "I know I'm going to be a great parent, and so is every other person who puts the love of their child before everything. I made this decision because I wanted to show up as my best and happiest self for him. In a way, this was for Tucker." Now, we'll return in a moment to the grotesque and laughable claim that he's destroying his body and denying his own manhood for the sake of his son. For the sake of his son, he says he's doing it. But first, we have MrBeast's own reaction to all of this. Yesterday, he sent out a tweet blasting those who've raised concerns about having a transitioning, quote-unquote, man appear constantly in videos meant for kids. He called it absurd and said that, called the concerns absurd, that is, and said that all this transphobia is starting to piss me off. Now, admittedly, MrBeast has been put in an extremely difficult situation because he built a multi-million-dollar empire with innocuous, family-friendly content targeted at kids. And now his friend and collaborator and sidekick has decided to turn these videos into a sort of visual journal of his gender transition. So MrBeast has a choice. He can either kick Tyson off of the team and then be excoriated as a transphobe, or he can come out fully in favor of transgenderism and he can stay, therefore, in the graces of the good graces of the media and LGBT activists, even if it means alienating a huge portion of his fan base, and especially the parents of his fan base. Well, unsurprisingly, he chose the latter. And now that he's gone down this road, there's really no coming back. You can expect much more pro-trans content from MrBeast going forward, which means that if you're a parent and you allow your child to watch MrBeast videos, now is a very good time to stop allowing that. We could probably assume that MrBeast would prefer not to have to deal with this, but Tyson has forced him to make a choice, and he chose. And he chose wrong. This is really the common thread. Tyson is forcing this onto people who are close to him, forcing it in more ways than one. A few months ago, Tyson posted a photo of his young son in high heels with the caption, quote, "Tucker chose to slay this morning." It's only a matter of time, we can assume, before we start hearing about Tucker's own, quote unquote, gender transition journey, a journey which Tyson will claim that Tucker chose for himself, but we can clearly see who is making the choices here. As for his wife, Katie, we can surmise how she feels about all this based on the fact that she is divorcing her husband. Tyson announced just a couple of weeks before coming out as trans or non-binary or whatever, that he and his wife had separated and were working on, quote unquote, finalizing things. So if you're keeping score at home, Chris Tyson has destroyed his marriage, abandoned his child to a broken home, created huge problems for his friend and business partner, potentially costing him millions of subscribers and therefore millions of dollars. And he has done all of this just so that he can live out his fantasies in public. He had a beautiful wife, a child, a family, an incredible job that most people would kill for, which had made him wealthy and famous. And he pulled the pin and chucked a hand grenade into the middle of that happy and serene picture. And for what? Also that he can be his, quote, happiest self, he claims. And he achieves his happiest self by rejecting his actual self and all the responsibilities that his actual self is duty-bound to fulfill. Now, Tyson is, of course, just the latest in a long line of grown married men who decide to come out as trans or non-binary. This was Rachel Levine's story. This is really a story of some of the most prominent trans activists in the country. I think grown men who transition after they've already had kids and are married, this is a demographic that is vastly overrepresented among trans activists. Now, we know that, a great many of the people who identify as quote unquote trans, you're talking a lot of this, this is because of rapid onset gender dysphoria and the social contagion factor. There's many adolescent girls who get caught up in this. But when it comes to the activists, it seems that a hugely disproportionate number of them are men, and especially men who, quote unquote, transitioned when they were already adults. So Tyson is then a valuable example because he reveals an important truth about the trans phenomenon. Despite what we are so often told, the decision to transition is not personal and private. Okay? It's not some sort of harmless personal decision. It's not like you're choosing an ice cream flavor at Baskin Robbins. Okay, that's a decision where you can rightly say to anybody who has an opinion about it, hey, this doesn't affect you, okay? What do you care? That's not this. You're doing something that will have a dramatic, life-altering, devastating effect on those who are closest to you. This is not a private journey that you walk alone. You are dragging others with you, whether they want to go or they don't, and almost always they don't. Indeed, all of Western society has been dragged into this. We are all impacted, and profoundly so, by individuals who refuse to accept reality and live as themselves. But those who are closest to the impact site will feel it the most. And many of them will end up buried under the rubble, starting first and foremost with the families. This is why a grown man like Chris Tyson, who makes this choice, really does not deserve our sympathy or our understanding. And I know saying that will probably get me in trouble yet again with many on the right who say, well, we got to be sympathetic and nice about this. Not to these people, because he is engaging in the ultimate act of family-wrecking narcissism. It is the deepest betrayal of his marriage vows, of his responsibility as a husband and a father. And even worse, he's dismantling his family in a way that society approves of, which means that his wife can't object to the total demolition of her family and her marriage. She can't cry out in anger or sadness while her husband takes a wrecking ball to her life without being labeled a transphobe and a bigot, which is probably why she's remained silent through all this. As far as I know, she hasn't said anything publicly. She's not even afforded the dignity of her grief. She is deprived of the right to be angry about this terrible thing that has been done to her. Okay, you're a grown adult man, you have a wife, and you transition. That is something you are doing to your wife and to yourself, but also to your wife. A man who has an affair, and leaves his wife for another woman, at least that guy has the decency to wreck his marriage in a way that allows his wife to hate him for it, and her anger will be validated by society. Men like Chris do the same kind of thing, yet they do it in a manner that calls for the wife's understanding. Very often we hear about men who transition with their wives' alleged support, and yet the details don't really add up. So, for example, a woman named Deborah tweeted this to me yesterday in response to one of my tweets. She said, quote, "My best friend Katie transitioned with the full support of her spouse, and in fact, they still live together even though they're officially divorcing. Not everyone has the same story. This is quite a beautiful story. I'm proud to have Katie as my friend." Yes, his spouse fully supports it. She thinks it's great. I mean, really, she's so happy about it. She really is. Also, on a totally unrelated note, they're getting a divorce. Because that's obviously what you do when your spouse makes a decision that you absolutely support. You divorce them for it. Obviously, the claims about supportive wives are always fictional in these cases. I mean, always. Okay, in every case, when a married man decides to, quote unquote, transition, the wife does not support it. And I don't care what the wife says about it publicly, she doesn't support it. And I know that because these women married men, okay? They didn't marry some kind of vague, ambiguous notion of a person. They didn't just say, oh, I'm marrying a person. It doesn't matter what they are, or what they look like, or anything. It's just a person. No, they married men. Men with definite characteristics, both physical and not. It is a form of abandonment, the worst form, in fact, to intentionally strip away and attempt to change everything about yourself that your wife thought she married. I mean, to deliberately attempt to become the opposite of what you are and what your wife married. It is, again, an extreme betrayal of your marriage vows. You are taking your wife's husband away from her. You're taking your child's father away from him. And the best you can do to justify that decision is to say that it makes you happy. So even by your own telling, even according to your own rationalization, you are choosing your happiness over the needs and desires and the happiness of your family. See, here's the thing. Transitioning is wrong always and every time. First, because it's impossible. You cannot transition from one sex to the other. But even if we lived in the sort of science fiction universe where such a thing was possible, it would still be wrong to do it when you're married and you have a child. Like if I believed in the reality of transitioning, I would still say that by the time you get married and conceive a child, the transition ship has sailed. It is your responsibility now, it's your obligation to suppress that part of you and live as the man that your wife and child need you to be. But it's not possible. And so the reality is so much worse. You're setting it all on fire. You're burning your life to the ground in pursuit of something you can never attain. You had something real and beautiful, and now you have nothing but a fantasy, a figment of your imagination. But at least you're happy, right? Except even your happiness is fake. Your happiness is as real as your womanhood. You aren't happy. Nobody is now. That was a trade-off. And it's never worth it. And that'll do it for the show, or for this portion of shows. Move over to Members Block. Hope to see you there. If not, talk to you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Godspeed.